Let me ask you something. Think about the last time you tried to learn something physical, a new sport, a dance move, a martial arts technique, maybe even just a new way to run or swim. How did you approach it? If you're like most people, you probably tried to be careful, methodical. You slowed things down. You tried to get it right. And here's the ironic part. That instinct, as reasonable as it feels, might be the exact thing slowing your progress. Today we're going deep into the neuroscience of skill learning. Not the motivational poster version of it. The actual, mechanistic, peer-reviewed version of how your nervous system acquires new movement patterns, and the specific adjustments to your practice sessions that the scientific literature points to as genuinely accelerating that process. Some of what I'm going to share is going to feel counterintuitive. Some of it might even frustrate you a little. But by the end of this, you'll have a framework that puts you ahead of most athletes, coaches, and trainers who've never looked at this research. So let's start with a classification that changes how you should think about any skill you want to develop. There are two fundamental categories of physical skill, and knowing which one you're dealing with before you practice it matters enormously. The first category is what researchers call open-loop skills. These are movements you execute and then get clean, delayed feedback on. Throwing a dart, attempting a free throw, hitting a serve in tennis. You complete the action, and then the result tells you whether it worked. You don't adjust in real time while the ball is in the air. It's already done. The second category is closed loop, which means you're performing a movement continuously and can correct yourself as you go. Think of a swimmer adjusting their stroke mid-lap, a drummer syncing their rhythm in real time, or a runner modifying their gait. The feedback is constant, and you're tweaking constantly. Why does this distinction matter? Because the strategy for improving is different. In an open-loop context, every attempt is a complete data point. The rep is the unit of measurement. In a closed-loop context, the quality of your in-the-moment adjustments is part of what you're training. Knowing which type of skill you're dealing with sets the stage for everything else. Now there's a second question that's just as important. What should your attention actually be on while you're practicing? Most people never ask this deliberately. They just start doing the thing. But your nervous system has three separate streams of information feeding into any movement. What you're sensing in your external environment, sights, sounds, the movements themselves, and something called proprioception, which is your body's internal awareness of where your limbs are in space. That quiet background sense that lets you reach for a coffee cup without staring at your hand. Proprioception gets ignored in most fitness conversations, but it's actually central to how rapidly you internalize new movement patterns. Here's what the neuroscience suggests. Early in learning a skill, trying to deliberately manage all three of these inputs simultaneously is one of the worst things you can do. Your nervous system gets overloaded and you end up making fewer attempts per session. And fewer attempts is the single biggest predictor of slow skill development. That brings me to the core finding I want you to walk away with today. It's simple, it's supported by multiple lines of research, and it runs completely contrary to what most people assume about learning. The single most important variable in how quickly you acquire a new physical skill is not the quality of your individual repetitions. It's the raw number of repetitions per unit of time. There's an experiment that illustrates this beautifully. A researcher set up a study where over 50,000 subjects were tasked with learning a basic programming challenge, organizing a set of commands to move a cursor through a maze. Half the group, when they got something wrong, simply received the message, "That didn't work, please try again." The other half were told, "You just lost 5 points." Everything else was identical. And here's what happened. The group that was told simply to try again had a 68% success rate. The group penalized for errors had a 52% success rate. But the more revealing finding was why. The first group generated dramatically more attempts per unit of time. They kept going. The second group hesitated, withdrew, and gave up more often. It's not about confidence. It's not about mindset in some abstract sense. It's about the raw number of times your nervous system gets to practice the pattern, and there's neurobiology behind this. A study published in the journal Science demonstrated that a specific region of the frontal cortex, when activated, caused subjects, regardless of their prior history of winning or losing in a competitive task, to generate more forward attempts, more reps. The brain area associated with winning wasn't generating more strength or more strategy. It was simply generating more action per unit of time. And more action per unit of time means more errors, more corrections, and ultimately, more rapid development of the underlying neural circuits. This is where I want to pause and make something explicit, because it's the part most people miss. Errors are not just acceptable in skill learning, they are the actual mechanism. A 2021 paper in the journal Neuron showed that making a mistake activates the frontal sensory cortical networks that anchor attention. The error is a biological signal to your nervous system that something needs to change. It opens the window for neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to rewire itself based on experience. Without errors, that window stays closed. A brain that isn't making mistakes isn't in a position to learn. It's just executing something it already knows. This is why ultra-slow, deliberate movement at the very beginning of skill learning is actually counterproductive, despite feeling responsible. When you move at a crawl, you don't generate the proprioceptive feedback that mirrors real movement, and, crucially, you don't make errors. No errors means no signal. No signal means no adaptation. The data suggest slow-motion rehearsal becomes valuable once you're already succeeding somewhere around 25 to 30% of the time. At that point, decelerating the movement and paying attention to finer details has a place, but from a standing start, maximum intensity repetitions at natural speed, with all the inevitable stumbles that come with that, is what the research consistently supports. Now let me tell you something about what happens immediately after your training session that almost nobody talks about, and that I think is genuinely one of the most overlooked tools in skill development. Studies on hippocampal activity have shown that after a motor learning session, the brain begins spontaneously replaying the motor sequences that were just practiced. Interestingly, in the immediate post-session window, that replay happens in reverse. The sequence runs backward. The exact reason for this is still being investigated, but what's clear is that this replay process is a key step in consolidating what you just practiced, and it requires one specific condition. You need to not be doing anything else. If you finish a training session and immediately pick up your phone, scroll through something, or shift your attention to a completely different task, you're interrupting this neural housekeeping process. The replay gets crowded out. Whereas if you sit down, close your eyes for even 5 to 10 minutes and do essentially nothing, not visualization, not reviewing your performance, just quiet idleness, you're giving the brain the space it needs to run that consolidation process. Later, during sleep that same night, the sequence replays again in forward order, cementing the pattern further, which is why good sleep after a skill learning session isn't just generally good advice. It's a mechanistically necessary part of the process. For intermediate and advanced practitioners, people who already have some baseline competency in their sport or activity, there's an additional tool worth exploring: metronome training. This means physically linking your practice repetitions to a rhythmic external cue, usually an auditory beat. Swimmers can use waterproof metronome devices that cue each stroke. Runners can use audio pacing apps. Weightlifters can tie their cadence to a beat. Golfers can link their swing to a tick. What metronome training does is several things at once. It pushes your rate of repetitions slightly above your current comfortable pace, which generates more errors and therefore more neuroplastic opportunity. It also anchors your attention to an external stimulus, which, somewhat mysteriously, seems to accelerate motor pattern acquisition beyond what the same number of repetitions produces without that external pressure. We don't fully understand the mechanism yet, but the effect appears consistently in the literature. There's also something fascinating that comes out of research on the cerebellum, often called the little brain because of its structure at the base and back of your skull, that has a direct practical application for expanding range of motion before you practice. The cerebellum integrates visual information, proprioceptive data, and the timing of your movements, and because of the way vision and limb control are linked inside it, your physical range of motion is actually influenced by your visual field. Here's something you can test right now. Stretch your arms out sideways into a T position and feel where your natural limit is. Then, keeping your head still, move your eyes as far as they'll go to the left. Hold for a moment, then as far right. Now retest your range. Most people notice somewhere between 5 and 15 degrees of additional extension. That's not a flexibility change, it's a neural one. You've just sent a signal to your cerebellum that updates its map of the space you're operating in. You can use this before any physical practice, particularly if range of motion is a limiting factor. On the topic of mental rehearsal, I want to be direct here because there's a lot of mythology around visualization in the self-improvement world. The claim you hear constantly is that imagining yourself performing a skill is essentially equivalent to actually performing it, that your brain can't tell the difference, and the research simply does not support that. What the research does support is that visualization activates the upper motor neurons, the command-generating circuits, in ways that are meaningfully similar to actual movement. One well-controlled study found that subjects who spent 15 minutes daily, 5 days a week, imagining specific resistance movements gained about 35% in finger strength and around 13.5% in elbow flexion strength over 12 weeks. Those are real numbers. But subjects who actually performed those movements physically improved by roughly 53%. Visualization is a genuine supplement. It is not a substitute. Use it when you can't physically train. You're traveling, the weather's wrong, you're managing minor soreness. But don't let the romantic idea of mental training crowd out the actual practice time that the neuroscience consistently identifies as irreplaceable. One supplement worth mentioning for people interested in physical skill performance is alpha-GPC, alpha-glyceryl phosphorylcholine, available over the counter. Studies have shown it can increase power output by roughly 14% at doses around 300 to 600 milligrams, and it also appears to have modest but real effects on cognitive function and growth hormone release at higher daily doses. If power output is relevant to your skill, sprinting, martial arts, rock climbing, court sports, it may be worth investigating. Unlike with cognitive learning, where you want to keep baseline dopamine and adrenaline levels from being artificially elevated beforehand, for motor skill practice, you'd take something like alpha-GPC before the session, not after. Let me bring this all together into a practical protocol. Session 1 of learning any new motor skill. Ask yourself whether it's open loop or closed loop. Then simply start doing it at natural speed as many times as you safely can within your allotted time. Don't slow it down. Don't obsess over getting it perfect. Let the errors happen. They're doing their job. After the session, close your eyes, sit quietly for 5 to 10 minutes, and let the brain run its background process. Then sleep. That's the sequence. On subsequent sessions, you start having the option to deliberately direct your attention to one specific aspect of the movement: grip, posture, timing, whatever. And the research says it doesn't matter much which aspect you choose, as long as you pick one and stay with it for the session rather than bouncing between elements. And as you progress, tools like metronome pacing, slow motion rehearsal once you've cleared that 25 to 30% success threshold, and targeted visualization can all compound your progress. The takeaway is this: skill lives in repetition, and repetition lives in errors. Your nervous system doesn't learn from perfection. It learns from the gap between what you attempted and what actually happened, and from the moments when you finally close that gap. Honor that process. Trust the mess. Give yourself the quiet time after. Get the sleep, and then show up and do it again. Here's your challenge for this week. Pick one specific skill you've been working on and commit to one session where your only goal is maximum reps, not quality. Count them. Notice what happens to your focus, your frustration, and, if you give yourself the quiet wind down afterward, your performance the next time. Then come drop your results in the comments. I want to know what skill you're working on and how it felt to just go for volume. And if this kind of research-backed content is what you're looking for, make sure you're subscribed. This is exactly what we do here every single week. Growth is not accidental, it's intentional. If you're ready to build a better version of yourself, welcome. Stay tuned.